Lionel Messi has experienced some pretty high highs, from winning a treble, to winning a World Cup, to getting a front row seat to the most iconic goal in recent memory. But which season was his best? Which year did he reach the highest of highs? When was Lionel Messi's prime? Well, I spent an unhealthy amount of time reading, watching, tracking, thinking, contemplating, surmising, pontificating, stewing, examining, ruminating, and ultimately appreciating this small but talented man in his career. Then I cut down 4 hours worth of information to deliver to you this, the most comprehensive investigation into the question, when was Lionel Messi's prime?
Just can't be done. Each time the doorbell rings, I still run. I don't know how in the world to stop thinking of him, 'cause I still love him so. I end each day the way I start out, crying my heart out.
In 2009, Avatar was released. Donald Trump sued a reporter for calling him a millionaire instead of a billionaire, and a fresh-faced Lionel Messi was having a breakout season for Barcelona. The season before, the Argentine prodigy managed 22 goal contributions in the league. A shockingly good haul for a guy who wouldn't be allowed to drink on a preseason tour to the US. However, it gets even more impressive when you consider that was tied for the 6th most in the league, more than the likes of Diego Forlan, Ruud van Nistelrooy, Samuel Eto'o, Thierry Henry, and Rahul. But wait, didn't I say the season after this was his breakout campaign? Well, I'm glad you asked. These are very good numbers. Numbers you'd associate with a top player. But what happened the year after was special. Think about Leonardo DiCaprio in Romeo and Juliet. A fantastic performance that put him on the path to stardom. A year later, however, he starred in Titanic and was immediately thrust up to the path of superstardom. 2009 was Lionel Messi's Titanic. The story goes like this. A young and ambitious Pep Guardiola walks into the office of one of his assistants and says, "Find me the footage with their centre backs. I want to see what they do." The "they" he was referring to was Real Madrid. Barca were 4 points clear at the top, and if they won, the title would have been theirs. Madrid were unbeaten in their last 18 matches, winning, get this, 17 of them. They were rolling. Pep knew his team needed to be perfect if they stood a chance. But why was he so hyper-focused on Madrid's centre-backs? Well, Pep had noticed a key weakness in Madrid's defense. They were not pressing high enough to pressure the area between the defensive line and the midfield. This left a gap in the middle of the park. A gap that could be exposed. I remember that it was a surprise for me. He had been talking with Tito Villanova and they had thought about me playing as a false 9. He was going to put Samuel and Thierry on the outside, and I was going to play as a false centre forward, said Messi in an interview years later. I wasn't going to stay there, but rather come out and join up with the central midfield. The idea was that Madrid centre backs would follow me out, and the 2 fast wingers we had would go around the back. And that's exactly what happened. Overall, Messi added 12 goal contributions to his season tally, enough to have him place 2nd in the league. His goal scoring in particular saw a huge surge. In fact, his goal scoring got better the better his competition was, scoring more goals per 90 against top half teams than against bottom half teams. He even took it one step further and scored more goals per 90 against top 6 teams than against the rest of the league. This isn't normal. You're not supposed to score more goals the better your opposition is, and yet that's exactly what Messi did in 2009. That would be like if in the Fast and Furious you kept giving Paul Walker's character more nos, but every time you did that, Vin Diesel would just beat him by a bigger distance. It just doesn't make sense, and yet it's somehow true. There was still some doubt over whether he could do it on the grandest of stages, aka the Champions League. By now, the media had already built up his and Cristiano's rivalry like it was Bird and Magic in the 80s, Tiger and Phil in the 2000s, or Klopp and 12:30 kickoffs in the 2010s. The fact that it seemed like CR7 had more Champions League success, punctuated by semi-final dumping in the previous season, meant the debate leaned more in favour of the Portuguese winger. The little maestro got his revenge this season though, with Barca winning 2-0 in the final and Messi supplying the dagger. In fact, this Champions League campaign was probably one of the best of his career, both in terms of total production and per 90 production. An astonishing goal in the final and a crucial assist in the second leg of the semi-final against Chelsea further bolstered the reputation of this campaign. Still, perhaps the biggest endorsement for this season was his on-off numbers. I'm gonna get very in the weeds with numbers and analytics here. So if you're not really interested in that argument, fast forward to this timestamp to skip past it. Alright, so all the nerds are still here? Great. You guys are my favorite, but don't tell the others, okay? Alright, let's get into it. In an attempt to measure Messi's impact on Barcelona's attack, I tracked Barcelona's goals with Messi on the pitch versus when he was not. The difference then, in theory, would be Messi's impact. Not only was 2009 the best figure of his career, it's not even close. Barcelona's attack was nearly a goal and a half better per 90 when he was on the field versus when he was not. That's staggering. By that metric, adding Messi to the team essentially doubled Barcelona's attacking effectiveness. And remember, this is arguably the best Barcelona team in the club's history. To have that kind of impact on a team that's already ridiculously talented means that you have to be uber special. And Messi was. But there are some problems with this. Firstly, in order to generate this stat, you need Messi to have spent a statistically significant amount of time off the pitch to be able to compare Barca with and without him. For some seasons, the sample size just wasn't enough. In 2015, for example, he played all but 45 minutes of Barca's league campaign. There's just not enough data to say for sure how valuable he was. Secondly, this stat is heavily context dependent. Since we're already working with smaller samples, changes in the team's philosophy, attitude, or playing style will be magnified. For example, in a match against Atletico Madrid, Barca put in a masterclass performance and scored 5 goals in the first half. With a more than comfortable lead, Guardiola decided to take Messi out of the game less than 25 minutes into the second half. Barca went on to score just 1 more goal the rest of the game. The team's scoring rate didn't drop because Messi was removed from the team. Rather, the priority of the team changed to protecting the lead and preserving the 3 points. The on-off stats, however, don't see this. This isn't the only chink in 2009 Messi's armor. In fact, what I'm about to talk about spells a completely different story to his on-off numbers. Another way to measure attacking impact is to calculate the portion of a team's goals a player had a direct involvement in. In other words, when Messi was on the pitch, what percentage of Barcelona's goals were either scored or assisted by him? Now, Messi's figure of 39.5% isn't bad. In fact, it's really good. Being involved in nearly 40% of your team's goals is pretty good going, especially when your team is an attacking juggernaut like 2009 Barcelona was. The problem? Out of all the seasons we looked at, this was Messi's lowest involvement. So, even though Messi was a part of a legendary attack, this relatively low portion of output means he probably wasn't as big a driver of this attack as he would be in future seasons. Even when you look at his raw production, it's good for normal footballer standards, but they were dreadfully low for Messi standards. In fact, it would take until his final season at Barca for his production on a per 90 basis to drop below this level. And even then, his raw total production was higher than this season. A big reason for this was his goal scoring. His movement in the box was really mature, and he was able to find little cracks and crevices he could slide his way into. It helped that he played with some exceptionally smart teammates too. Give me Xavi sliding through balls and Iniesta's little 1-2s, and I'd also bag a couple. However, getting into good positions wasn't a problem for Messi. Finishing once he was there was at times. Here's an example where his youth and inexperience probably count against him. He does really well to get into this position and have the ball set up nicely on his favorite left foot. But he opts to go for power rather than placement, and smashes it right at the keeper. He's pretty much 1v1 with the keeper here, and he pops it straight into his arms. Also, despite his goal scoring going up as his competition got better, his overall goal contributions dropped pretty significantly. Things get really ugly when you look at his contribution to Barca's goals against these tougher matches. It could pretty easily be argued that he had the least impact he's ever had in his big games during his career this season. This was mostly down to his assists completely falling off a cliff. This was a sign of a bigger weakness for Messi. Here, he's smart enough to see the opportunity to slide a ball through to Eto'o, but it's such a high-level pass that his execution needs to be pinpoint accurate, and it just wasn't in this case. He'd also telegraph his passes at times, which made them easier to defend. He also wasn't on that telepathic wavelength with his teammates yet. Here, him and Iniesta have different ideas for how this play should develop. The one player he did manage to find some great chemistry with was Eto'o, and this wouldn't be the last time he'd strike up a special partnership with the striker. With all that said though, he still displayed the ability to identify these killer passes, and this proved to be a good sign for his development at this age. For our purposes though, it does count against him here. One aspect of his game that was elite from the very beginning was his dribbling. He was so elusive and silky, and even at this age he would strike fear into the defenders he would come up against. He was just so twitchy and sprightly as a dribbler, and that helped him get out of jail a couple times. He was prone to a bit of over-dribbling at times, and while confidence is good, he really backed his dribbling ability. His lack of physicality was also a problem at times, and he struggled to jostle with players, which limited his dribbling ability to a degree. It should also be noted that he played 28 90s this season. This was mostly a product of Guardiola's rotation policies, but it can be argued that his overall value and impact on the team was diminished because he just wasn't in the team as much. Ultimately, I'd give this season the Will Smith in Bad Boys Award. Will Smith was a young, up-and-coming actor who had done extremely well in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and was on track to becoming a star. After Bad Boys though, he jumped to another level. People now believe he could be a super duper star, and while it wasn't his peak, it was where it all began.
Now back up, put the gun down, and give me a pack of tropical fruit bubblicious. And some Skittles.
In 2011, Kim Kardashian got married, Kim Kardashian got divorced, and Lionel Messi led Barcelona to another Champions League final against Manchester United, which they won, of course. By now, the minute magician had a better grip on the false nine role, and in my opinion, we see some of the best true false nine play of his career this season. He was extremely central to Barcelona's attacks, both literally and figuratively, and would often drop deep to get touches, keep things moving, and disorientate the defense. At times, he'd even drop deeper than the entire midfield three. Most of the time, however, he'd sit between Xavi and Iniesta and in front of Busquets. This is a great example of just how dangerous he can be from these sorts of areas. Messi's chemistry with his teammates had reached Louis Pasteur levels, but as you saw in that goal, his strike partners had undergone a bit of a shuffle. Eto'o and Henry had moved on from the club, Pedro was promoted to the first team, and David Villa was brought in from Valencia. The Villa move was a particularly interesting one. Having played the majority of his career as a centre forward, Villa was basically signed to play as a winger to allow Messi to continue playing down the middle. Villa's numbers suffered as a result, but having a player who could drift inside and was comfortable operating in the vacated centre forward place was so valuable to Barca. It also shows just how effective the false nine strategy was at the time. This wasn't a break glass in case of emergency move. No, this was the most optimal way for Barca, and more specifically Messi, to play. A big reason why this tactic was such a success was because of his dribbling. His ability to drive straight at defenses like this created so many opportunities for him to take advantage of. By the way, isn't this the biggest oxymoron in football? The guy is probably the smallest and least physically imposing person on the pitch, and yet when he runs at defenders, the fear in their eyes makes it seem like they're in the way of a freight train. Speaking of physically imposing, do you want to know one thing that Lionel Messi and Aaron Donald have in common? For those of you who don't know, Aaron Donald is a 6'1", 280-pound American football player. Lionel Messi is a 5'7", 150-pound rest of the world football player. Life for these individuals should be very different. Yet, the one thread that ties them together is the fact that when they're on the field, they both get double-teamed. A lot. Even against quality opponents and in big matches, the doubles and sometimes triples kept coming. Another tactic used by teams was to simply hack him down. Much like Shaq in the early 2000s, it was much easier to simply foul him than it was to try and defend him straight up.
If you gotta use strategy to try to beat me, that's just telling me you soft.
Well, I'm not made of industrial rubber, so they do hurt. Particularly in the first 10 minutes of a match when I'm not properly warmed up, said Messi in an interview. Despite being 2 years older, he was still relatively weak compared to his peers, but he made up for his weakness with sheer determination and resilience. However, the most confusing part of this season was his passing, because I'm not completely convinced how good it actually was. His raw assist numbers were very good, and assisting more than a quarter of his teammates' goals while he was on the pitch was a fair chunk. So from the surface, it seems like a much improved passing season. And this would make sense, since the eye test will tell you he's played a much bigger role in Barca's build-up. The problems, though, start to stack up when you look at his performance against great opposition. While his numbers against top-half teams are actually really good, his performance against top 6 teams was some of the worst in his career. And a large part of that was because of his poor assist return. He was getting an assist fewer every 2 games. And in super competitive games where a goal can be the difference between 3 points and 1, that drop in production counts. This isn't just some statistical anomaly too. The eye test backs it up. His execution around the box was lacking at times, and I felt like he left a lot on the table in this regard. He was also super aggressive with his passes, something that would be an asset to him in the future, but proved to be a liability at this time in his career. His finishing also wasn't as ruthless as it would be in the years to come, and a big byproduct of his playing a deeper role was that he was taking shots from a lot further out, meaning they were lower percentage shots compared to if he was taking them from closer to the goal. Yeah, unfortunately this isn't possible. You don't get an extra goal if the shot comes from outside the box. This ultimately makes for a pretty mediocre goal return and makes his overall numbers look rather lukewarm relative to his other seasons. It was a different story in the Champions League, however. After a fairly pedestrian campaign by his standards in 2010, Leo bounced back and had one of his better campaigns, highlighted by 2 away goals against Madrid in the semis and a goal against United in the final. This season gets the 2024 Tua Tagovailoa Award. This season, Tua had some of the best passing stats in the NFL, and some of the best in recent history. Yet, when you really examine his play, there were some serious holes in his game. And when he came up against any real competition, those numbers dropped, and dropped hard.
Hey, little easy on that, buddy.
Ladies and gentlemen,
In 2012, Taylor Swift was dominating the music scene, Jeremy Lin was dominating the NBA, and Lionel Messi was dominating, well, just about every team he faced. And that's not an exaggeration. This was the first truly nutty season we see from the mini maestro. Remember Haaland's 2023 campaign where he scored more than a goal a game? Well, not only did Messi score more goals than that, but if you add Haaland's assists to his goals, you're still 6 goals shy of just Messi's goal output. Roughly the same is true when you consider Mo Salah's record-breaking first campaign in the Premier League. Not even Cristiano Ronaldo was able to match this Messi season. Yeah, we're really cooking now. Not only were his numbers exceptionally good, but they were impactful too. More than half of Barca's goals were scored or assisted by Messi, and the team needed this level of production from him. Alexis Sanchez joined the team from Udinese, but struggled with injury throughout the campaign. And while he was effective when he was on the pitch, he ultimately had a disappointing debut season. Villa suffered a serious long-term leg injury which sidelined him for pretty much the entire second half of the season, and Pedro had a down year production-wise. The attack had to be carried by Messi. Not only did he manage to keep them afloat, he somehow managed to get this Barca team to be one of the best attacking teams he's ever played for. He was able to do this when the competition got stiffer too, averaging 2 goal contributions per game against top-half teams. Yes, that's 2 goals or assists against teams in the top half. He was also more effective against top-half competition than he was against the rest of the league, and more than half of his goal contributions came against top-half teams. Oh, and it gets better. Barcelona's attack as a whole was also better against top-half competition than the rest of the league, and Messi's portion of Barca's goal contributions also went up. To summarize, Messi was very good against good teams. But what about really good, bordering on great teams?
No, that's not gonna work. What are you, 65?
Well, Messi's goal contributions against top 6 teams went up even more than it did against top half teams. Barcelona's attack reached some of the highest levels we've seen against any competition, let alone the best in the league. And Messi had a hand in 2 out of every 3 goals scored by this high-powered Barca attack. To summarize, Messi was very good against great teams. That form continued in the Champions League, where he managed a career best for goals and goal contributions, nearly touching 2 goal contributions a game for a full campaign. The only slight detractor from this season was his performance in the latter stages of the tournament. His 2 goals in the second leg of the quarterfinal against Milan were pretty important, but he only managed an assist in the other 3 games post the round of 16. Nevertheless, it was an all-time campaign, and one of the only ones that really has a chance of stacking up against some of the great Ronaldo campaigns of the 2010s. A big reason he was able to do this was because of his insane goal scoring ability. Messi scored a total of 50 goals from just over 201 shots. That's some of the most efficient scoring we've seen from him. As you'd expect, his goals followed a similar trend to his goal contributions, which basically means he scored more goals the better the opposition was. At 1.5 goals per game and nearly half of Barca's goals, the South American sniper was cooking top half teams. And yes, that trend continued with top 6 teams ramping their scoring rate over 1.5 goals per game and over half of all Barca's goals. As Paul Doyle wrote for The Guardian, if only everything in life were as reliable as Messi. A big driver of this gargantuan scoring rate was his positioning. When we looked at the last season, I mentioned how he was dropping very deep to get on the ball. This season, however, we see much less of that. He acted as more of a focal point, wasn't as involved in the play, and stayed considerably higher up the pitch. As a result, he was put in far more advantageous positions to get on the end of final passes or create for himself in the box. But it wasn't all down to his positioning. His movement to burst or slither into dangerous areas had also leveled up and made him super deadly in the box. He was also just as electric outside the box. Defenders were immediately put into a state of panic whenever he had the ball at his feet, as they aimlessly tried to read or guess whether he would pass, dribble or shoot, or even just in which direction he would do any of the 3. He'd often drift just outside the box like this. That draws the defensive line forward a bit, creating space in behind and leaves these little gaps in between that can be exploited. A little 1-2 with Iniesta was enough to do the trick, but the Valencia defenders did a good enough job to recover and force him wide. Just 2 minutes later, he picks the ball up on the edge of the final third. Not quite as deep as he would have in previous seasons, but nowhere near where a traditional striker would. He turns in an instant, feints past one, fakes the chip pass into the box, and then sneakily slides this through ball into the path of Iniesta. The weight on the pass was a bit like Eden Hazard when he arrived at Real Madrid, but the play before that was breathtaking. The double and yes, even sometimes triple teams continue to come as teams scramble to find a way to stop the tiny technician. And it reminded me a lot of watching The Last Dance when the Pistons started getting a lot tighter and more physical with Jordan. In response, Jordan got stronger and learned to shrug off his physicality from them. I think Messi underwent a similar experience. Now, I'm not saying Messi was shrugging off defenders like prime Michael Jordan here, but he was able to bounce off defenders a little easier and keep going. This made him an even better dribbler, and at this point he was simply untouchable. Here he picks up the ball just inside the Chelsea half and he immediately demands the attention of at least 5 Chelsea defenders. But they can do nothing to stop him and he's allowed to dribble all the way into the box. As Arsene Wenger put it, he's a PlayStation footballer. Mundo Deportivo took it one step further and gasped, "On Twitter yesterday, it was written that Messi is the only player better in real life than on PlayStation." His chemistry with Dani Alves had reached Alfred Nobel status, and he really improved his passing to the point where he was now a squeaky clean passer in the short range. Many will feel I'm hating on his early career passing, but being able to almost flawlessly consistently make these positive and aggressive forward passes is no easy task. Before this season he wasn't making them. Now he was. These kinds of vertical passes were really important to help passer advance and get into dangerous positions. His passing around the box could still use a bit more of a buff and polish though, as he wouldn't be quite as dialed in as he would be in the future. His assist output was also pretty underwhelming, but when you consider his role as Barca's talisman and the lack of attacking talent around him, you can understand why his goal contributions lent heavily in favor of goals rather than assists. But perhaps the biggest drawback for this season was the number of penalties he scored. This was the first and only time Messi broke double digits for penalties in a season, with his next highest tally at 6. This season gets the Will Chamberlain Award, a truly nutty statistical season that broke records and set the bar for individual statistical performance.
I'm gonna tell you something. As bad as it looks, you didn't miss by that much. You just see me make 2 in a row. No, I had to set for fair. There you go. I'm good for $5. I just made the last 3 of them. I don't care. This is the one I'm talking about for $5. Get it up! Get it up!
In 2013, people were playing Flappy Bird, doing the Harlem Shake, and watching Lionel Messi change what we thought was possible. Yes, this was the first season we'll consider without Pep, but his right-hand man, Tito Villanova, will be taking over, and the goals kept coming. Messi's raw stats weren't as impressive as the last season, but almost all of that can be chalked up to fewer games played as a result of struggles with a hamstring strain. As a goal scorer though, this was arguably his peak, and probably one of the best pure goal scoring seasons of all time. Better than Gerd Müller, Dixie Dean, Cristiano Ronaldo, or anybody else you care to name, barring potentially Pele. He had an extremely quick trigger, and that simply allowed him to get more high quality chances off at a better clip than anyone else. In fact, what I'm about to show you is so disgusting it might be hazardous to your health. Please contact your local Department of Health to find out if it's safe to view this. If you're under the age of 16 or have suffered from heart problems in the past, I recommend you don't watch this. Side effects have been reported to include trying to replicate this goal 987 times and failing every single time. Frankly, it's abhorrent. Alright, here it is. Messi floats into some space outside the box, plays a first-time, perfectly controlled and weighted pass to Iniesta, who in turn plays a perfectly controlled and weighted first-time pass back to him before one touch and bang. Rewind back a few passes, and I don't think it's crazy to call this the quintessential Barcelona goal. Pep Guardiola's masterpiece, even more so in the fact that he wasn't even there, and it was overseen by a student, like Frankenstein's monster. While his raw stats may have come in a bit short of the previous season, his rate stats are some of the best we are likely to ever see. For reference, when CR7 scored 48 in the season in 2015, his best goal scored per 90 season of his career, he was still 0.17 goals per 90 short of this Messi season. That translates to 6.5 more goals for Messi over the course of a season. Even when you compare him to the very best, he's somehow still significantly better. Positionally, he was a lot more Dora the Explorer than SpongeBob SquarePants, which is to say he moved around quite a bit. He was afforded more positional freedom under Villanova, and he was back to dropping deep and participating in build-up. Here he picks up the ball on the halfway line and skips past two defenders before laying the ball off and getting past up the pitch. This freedom of movement turned defenses into pretzels. Just look at how far he pulls Frank Ribery out of position with his movement. Had him more out of position than Kyle Walker in net. Messi's impact on this Barca team was, as you probably expected, immense. He contributed to nearly 60% of Barcelona's goals and scored more than 40% of their non-penalty goals. He also propelled Barca's attack to some of the highest of heights during his time there, despite there only being one other double-digit scorer, that being Villa with 10. However, that high-octane attack was blunted when he faced strong opposition. Barca were over half a goal worse against top-half teams and nearly a goal and a half worse against top 6 teams. Those are some of the biggest drop-offs in his career. And that difference between top 6 and non-top 6 games in particular was the biggest drop-off. The numbers themselves are still very good, but we don't see that uptick in production we see in some of his other best seasons. A reason for this could be that Barca's team this season just wasn't as good as most of the others he's played on. Despite his individual production remaining the same or perhaps dropping slightly, his contribution to the team's goals overall increased as the competition got harder. This shows Barca's reliance on Messi. Another major negative from this season was his performance in the Champions League. It's probably one of the worst campaigns we'll consider in this video, with him contributing just over a goal per 90. Once again, pretty good going for everyone but Messi. His game time in the knockout stages was limited, and when he was on the pitch, he wasn't too impactful, having done most of his work during the group stage of the competition. Overall though, this season gets the 2016 Jason Day Award. Yeah, I know this one might be a bit niche for most football fans, but hear me out. Back in 2016, when all the best players in the world were all still playing on the PGA Tour, the number 1 ranked player in the world at the time, Jason Day, recorded the best putting season in golf history. He was absolutely smoking everyone on the greens, and it felt like the ball would disappear after every putt, no matter the distance or break. In the same way, nobody could touch the rate to which Messi could put the ball in the back of the net, nobody could match the rate at which they could put the ball in the bottom of the cup. In 2020, we saw Michael Jordan's last dance, LeBron's last ring, and Lionel Messi's last truly great season. There was nothing special about his raw goal production this season. In fact, it was pretty mediocre. His goal-scoring rate had dropped to the lowest level since he became a full-time starter, and Barca's overall attack was nowhere near their usual standards. Sure, Messi accounted for a crazy amount of Barca's overall goal contributions, but this was not a Barca team lighting the world on fire, finishing second in the league, losing in the quarters of the Copa del Rey, and getting brutalized by Bayern in the Champions League. Yet, it still has a case as the best season of his career because of one thing: his playmaking. The man racked up 21 assists in the league. As far as I could track, that's the most assists in a single season in any of the top 5 leagues. He became the first La Liga player to both score and assist 20 goals in a season, and assisted over 40% of Barcelona's goals this season. That level of performance held up against stronger competition as well. By now, he had fully transformed into the creator role. He'd gone from Steph Curry to John Stockton. This was something he flirted with early on in his career, but now it's finally come to fruition, operating as some hybrid right winger / number 10 / deep lying playmaker. He leaned much more on his passing than his dribbling, almost mirroring the tendencies from when he was younger, when he was more likely to use his dribbling to move the ball forward. His chemistry with Suarez was off the charts, and very reminiscent to his chemistry with Eto'o back in the day. As a result of this change in positioning, he was once again placed further from the goal. This was a hindrance in the past, but by now he had developed a far quicker trigger on his shots, and that allowed him to still get shots off and avoid completely falling off as a goal scorer. That's pretty much the entire case though. The rest of his profile is nowhere near as appealing as his other seasons. He was still one of the best dribblers on the planet, but he just wasn't as sharp and snappy as he once was. Kinda makes me think of late career Nolan Ryan and his fastball. At 43, that thing was still an A-level pitch, helping him lead the majors in strikeouts. But it just wasn't that A++ pitch it had been when he was younger. His overall numbers don't get me excited either. His drop-off as a goal scorer was really unfortunate, considering that this Barca team was crying out for more goals. His performance against top teams was extremely underwhelming, and probably the worst of his career at Barca. And this also may be his worst Champions League campaign at the club. His production was majorly down, and the campaign ended with that humiliating buying game. Finally, as I mentioned at the top of the season, this just wasn't a very good Barca team. Even with Messi's record-breaking numbers, this was actually a bad Barca attack, and at least some of that blame has to be assigned to Messi. This season gets the 2020 LeBron Award. That was the season when LeBron led the league in assists. Everyone knew the man had a basketball supercomputer between his ears, but when you think of LeBron as a player, it's the dunks, the athleticism, the scoring that comes to mind first. Heck, even the chase down blocks get mentioned before we talk about his passing. Then, almost just to prove he could do it, the man averaged 10 assists a game, something nobody else in the league managed. You know someone deserves a seat at the GOAT table when they just start doing extremely difficult side quests later on in their career just to prove a point. You may have noticed that I failed to even mention any of the MSN seasons. That's not because Messi wasn't good during those seasons. In fact, he was amazing. There's a reason this is regarded as the best front three ever. Averaging around 3 goals a game with him on the field, these were some of the best attacks Messi's played in. But not the best. Despite that being the best attack he's played in talent-wise, during none of the 3 seasons those three played together did Barca's attack reach the levels it did in 2012 and 2013, when he was playing with a far inferior attack talent-wise. As good as Pedro and Sanchez were, they were nowhere near as effective as Suarez and Neymar. And yet, Messi was able to propel Barca to higher heights with Pedro and Sanchez than he could with Suarez and Neymar. Based on that, I simply couldn't justify having any of those seasons in consideration. Also, it's not like he was lighting the world on fire statistically either. His numbers for the most part were pretty mediocre for his standards, and while there were some stats that popped, his 61 goal contributions in 2015 and his 66% portion of goal contributions against top 16s in 2017, there were equally some pretty bad stats too. Plus, he was outplayed by Suarez in 2016, when the Uruguayan had more goals and assists than him, and he ranked below Suarez and Neymar in terms of assists in 2017. This period reminds me a lot of Leo in Don't Look Up. I mean, it's a star-studded cast. Jennifer Lawrence, Timothée Chalamet, Cate Blanchett, Tyler Perry, Meryl Streep, Ariana Grande, Jonah Hill, Chris Evans, and it's directed by Adam McKay. That's nearly as much talent put together as the We Are the World recording. And yet, the movie kinda fell flat. Regardless of your views on the subject matter, it definitely was not even close to being one of Leo's best movies. Then compare that to The Revenant, a movie loved by the critics, with a cast whose big names only really included Tom Hardy and Will Poulter. With an infinitely smaller and less talented cast, Leo was able to propel The Revenant to a higher level than he was able to with Don't Look Up. As a result, The Revenant earned him his first Oscar, a signal that maybe was his peak, his apex. Nobody's saying that about him in Don't Look Up. Now for the part of the video you've all been waiting for. Believe it or not, all of that was just a way to set up this portion here. After a brutal amount of thinking and analysis, I feel confident in saying the following 3 seasons were convincingly Lionel Messi's best: 2012, 2013, and 2019. The rest all had their strengths and a reasonably strong case, hence their inclusion in the video. However, in my eyes, these 3 were in a different stratosphere. I think the best place to start would be to compare the 2012 and 2013 seasons. The year 2012 is often spoken of as the best calendar year by a player. But what's interesting about our exercise is that this year is broken up into 2 seasons. Therefore, much of the strengths of one season will overlap with the strengths of the other. The reason for this high regard is mainly down to his goal production. 2012 beats 2013 for total goal contributions, but that's mainly down to him playing almost every minute of that season. On a per 90 basis, 2013 was pretty significantly better. That combination of all-time volume and all-time efficiency gives 2013 the advantage for me. However, when assessing the value to a team, being able to play more can sometimes make up for lack of efficiency. Fewer minutes played for Messi in 2012 meant more minutes for the likes of Sanchez, Villa or Pedro. Even if we compare Messi's production to the best of the rest, Messi still provided nearly a goal per 90 more. meaning Barca scored a goal more per 90 when Messi was on the pitch compared to when Messi was replaced by his next best alternative. Meaning that over the course of a season, simply by having Messi on the pitch, Barca were a significantly better team. So the number of games Messi was able to play had a significant impact on where Barca finished in the league. With that in mind then, 2012 deserves a major boost, as Messi was able to play in all but one game for the Blaugrana in the league. Returning to goals then, Messi actually scored more non-penalty goals in 2013 than in 2012, and as a result, his non-penalty goals per 90 was significantly better than in 2012. His assists were lower though, and this time his per 90 stats weren't there to save him. In terms of overall contribution to Barca's goals, there's nothing much between them, except when it comes to the portion of the team's non-penalty goals scored. There, 2013 has the edge. 2012 starts to fight back hard when it comes to performance against tough opposition though. 2012 was meaningfully better than 2013 against both teams in the top half and teams in the top 6. In both instances, he got significantly better, while in 2013 he got worse. His portion of Barca's goals against better opposition was round about the same in both years, but Barca's attack was slightly better in 2012. Overall then, I have to say that Messi was better against better opposition in 2012 than in 2013. 2013 does counterpunch with a significantly better attack when Messi was on the pitch though. The real dagger for me was Champions League performance though. As we discussed when we broke the season down, Messi had a brilliant campaign in 2012, while his 2013 campaign belonged to the bottom tier relative to his career. This, combined with my games played theory and his performance against top teams, leads me to believe that Messi was better in 2012 than in 2013. Finally, that leaves us with 2012 versus 2019. Two very different seasons stylistically. Two seasons where Messi provided value in different ways. In the end, I think it comes down to a philosophical question. Which type of player do you value more? 2012 Messi was the ultimate ceiling raiser. Put him on a good team and he immediately lifts them to a great team. He excelled at the most valuable ability on the pitch, putting the ball in the back of the net. He was an attack onto himself, and it was a guarantee that it would be a good one. 2019 Messi, on the other hand, was the ultimate floor raiser. He had the ability to cover over so many cracks and make a team good just by virtue of him being in it. This was the most complete version of Messi, the one with the least deficiencies, and the most variety in the way he could provide his value. This was also the most fun version of Messi I watched. Seeing him get involved in the play and impact the game at such a high level was a joy for me. However, when it comes to providing value to a championship level team, there's no version of Messi better than 2012. Potentially the best complementary player of the modern era, 2012 Messi was able to provide all-time levels of value and output without needing to have the ball at his feet constantly. He was able to allow the players in the system around him the opportunity to do their thing and manipulate the defense before he would pop up at the most critical or highest leverage moment and provide the moment of magic needed. Ben Taylor from Thinking Possible talks about scalability when ranking players. That basically means, will this player's skill get better the better his teammates are? This is really important because nobody's really interested in a player being able to lift a relegation level team to the mid-table, or even a mid-table level team to European spots. No, the best players are the ones who can lift a Champions League qualifying team to a league winning team. It's far more difficult and far more valuable to be able to make good players better than it is to make bad players good. That pretty much brings us to the end of the video. I've spent over 6 months making this video and countless nights pondering this question as I fall asleep. If you haven't figured out yet, I'm a bit of a sports junkie. Questions like this fill up my free time, and yet very few have twisted me into a thought pretzel like this one. I don't even know if this is the right way to define his quote-unquote prime. The original version of this video was for me to explore his prime across various definitions. What was his best season? What was his best 3-year run? What was his best game? And finally, what was his greatest moment? In the end, just focusing on his best season proved to be nearly too much to handle in one video. If the reception to this video is good, perhaps I'll come back to tackle the other questions. For now though, after many hours of laboring and deliberating, I have come to the conclusion that 2011-2012 was Lionel Messi's peak. In 2014, EA released the greatest soundtrack ever, Disney released the worst soundtrack ever, and Messi delivered a season that felt more like the former than the latter. After Tito Villanova resigned as Barca manager due to health reasons, the club hired Tata Martino to be its next coach. The Argentine had just been managing Messi's previous club in Argentina and had plenty of success coaching in South America. However, he'd never had a job with anywhere near as much scrutiny as the Barca job, and at times it showed. There were more changes too, with David Villa leaving the club for Atleti. This was a problem. Villa was arguably Barca's most productive attacker outside of Messi. It's a good thing they signed his replacement 7 days earlier though. Neymar was lighting up the South American and international stage, but this was a big move. Unlike other Brazilian greats like Ronaldo or Ronaldinho, he would not first be going to a stepping stone club. This was like Margot Robbie jumping straight into the Wolf of Wall Street after not doing much previously. Both were exceptionally talented, but hadn't been asked to perform at this high level before. The starts were mostly shared between the front four of Messi, Pedro, Sanchez and Neymar, and they were pretty evenly split. All of them started somewhere between 19 and 29 games for Barca in the league. You'd imagine Messi would get a greater share of starts, but he suffered yet another hamstring injury, ruling him out for a prolonged period of time. As a result, he completed less than 28 90s in the league, his lowest mark since becoming a full-time starter. This affected his raw goal contribution numbers, with him posting some of the lowest numbers of his career. A large chunk of those goal contributions came from the penalty spot too. His portion of Barcelona's goals was still above 50%, but even that number is fairly mediocre for him, especially for his time at Barca. And this was on top of the fact that Barca's attack had dropped significantly coming off the last 2 years. I know what you're thinking. Why would he include this incredibly mid-Messi season in a video investigating his prime? Well, here's why. Simply put, this man showed up in the big games. Much like Jimmy Butler, who coasted through the regular season only to play like a top 5 player in the game in the playoffs, Messi had a fairly innocuous season apart from his games against top opposition. His goal contributions went up significantly. His portion of Barca's goal contributions went up drastically. More goals, more assists, just green arrows galore. The sample size was also pretty good, even when you compared it to his healthier seasons. Messi's game had matured. He played at a much more controlled tempo and pace. He had the optimal balance between playing quickly and aggressively to try and catch the defense napping, and playing slowly and conservatively, trying to lull them to sleep. Even though his assists don't reflect it, his passing was now pristine. Those risky passes that weren't quite coming off in the past were now starting to connect, and this made him even more dangerous with the ball at his feet. If that was even possible. I mean, look at this. He picks up the ball just inside the Madrid half and pierces the entire defense with a pass through to Neymar. And that's a penalty and a red card. By now, he'd also learned how to dribble not just to get past guys, but to draw fouls in tricky situations too. Finally though, his Champions League came around earlier in the quarters this time, so who really knows. He failed to register an assist in the entire campaign and managed just 2 goals in the 4 knockout games he played in. A goal every 2 Champions League knockout games would be something most players would be proud of. But relative to Messi's other seasons, it's on the lower end of the spectrum. With reference to Jimmy Butler earlier, this season has to get the Miami Heat award, which is traditionally awarded to a player or team that performs significantly below their talent level in the regular season and then significantly overperforms their talent level when the games really matter. Congrats, Leo. In 2019, lots of people liked an egg, a few people got scammed, but almost nobody realized Lionel Messi was having one of the best seasons of his career. To the point where writers were calling him underrated. We've skipped a couple years into the future, or I should actually say into the past. It's like instead of going back to the future, we went forward to the past. Anyway, the man was now 31. And past his expiration date. At the time, everyone knew the best before date for footballers was 30, the unofficial marker for the edge of the cliff. Some, like Wayne Rooney, fall sharply, while others, like Luka Modric, fall gradually. Either way, the fall is inevitable. No traditionalist would expect a player to reach their prime post the Big 3-0. I'm here to tell you the traditionalists were wrong. By now, Messi had returned to his natural habitat. After years of pillaging defenses as a false 9, he had returned home for what should be a quiet and restful life on the right wing. The departure of Neymar in 2017 changed that. The baton was never passed. It's almost like a relay racer who's about to receive the baton from his teammate but switches to the lane of a different team and decides to run the whole race by himself, just to prove to everyone he can win on his own and that he didn't need his teammates. Messi was that teammate, stranded with the baton in his hand and nobody to give it to. Barca chose to replace Neymar with Philippe Coutinho. True, they were both Brazilian, but that's like signing Emerson Royale to replace Cafu. The minutes up front were shared between Messi, Suarez, Coutinho and Dembele. There were some more personnel changes too. Xavi, Iniesta and Alves were all gone. Now the key sources of creativity were Rakitic, Roberto and Alba. That's like casting Donald Glover and Maya Erkson to replace Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie in the Mr. and Mrs. Smith reboot. They're solid actors, but you're asking them to recreate some of the best chemistry not found in the periodic table. The result was an intense reliance on Messi. Not just for goals, but for everything. Messi contributed to over 65% of Barcelona's goals this season. That's the highest of his career. No season before that had even really come close. Yes, not even in his record-breaking seasons did he contribute to more of Barca's goals than he did this season. He also scored more than 40% of Barca's goals himself, the second highest mark of his career. He was Barcelona's attack, more than he had ever been before. That reliance was even greater in games against top-half teams, where his contribution to Barca's goals would nearly reach 70%, and would break that mark when they played against top 6 opponents. Allow me to rephrase that. More than 70% of Barcelona's goals against top 6 teams were either scored or assisted by Messi. He was also scoring more than half of Barcelona's goals against top half and top 6 teams, and his assist contribution was outrageous too. Barcelona's Messi reliance peaked in a 1-0 win against Real Valladolid, in which they took 20 shots. Naturally, Messi scored the winner, but that's almost besides the point. 20 shots is a lot. No team in Europe's top 5 leagues averaged that much all season, not even the 98-point Premier League winners Manchester City. But guess what? Messi either took or assisted all 20 of Barcelona's shots. 20 shot involvements was the highest going back to 2012. Once again, Lionel Messi was Barcelona's attack. In work done at the time by James York at StatsBomb, James showed that high-usage players like this seem more likely to exist on teams lower down the table. If a mid-level team happens to stumble onto a blossoming superstar who's way better than all his teammates, it makes sense to build the team's attack around said soon-to-be superstar before he leaves for a team higher up the food chain. However, as Ryan O'Hanlon pointed out in his piece at the time, Messi played for the team that had won 7 out of the last 10 La Liga titles, finished 9 points clear at the top of the table, and ranked 4th in the world in 538's rating system and 1st in the ELO system. Oh, and according to Transfermarkt, Barcelona was the most valuable team in the world, at a just over £1 billion valuation. Despite the undeniable talent on this team, they were all looking to Messi, and he almost never failed to deliver. In fact, the only time he didn't was that fateful second leg against Liverpool at Anfield. Had Barcelona managed to survive that game, the treble would have been a real possibility. Sure, they lost to Valencia in the final of the Copa del Rey, but by then the dream was already over. The league was wrapped up with ease, and had Barca managed to protect a 3-goal lead, in which the opposition had scored 0 away goals, they would have faced a Spurs team with an injured Harry Kane in the Champions League final. If a couple moments go differently, there's a very real possibility Lionel Messi could have brought this team a treble by himself. Possibly the greatest achievement by a player in the modern era. In fact, I think his performances in this Champions League campaign were better than in the seasons he did win the treble. Sure, he did have more total goal contributions in 2012, but his rate stats in 2019 were unbelievable. His output in the Champions League this season was better than most of his production in the league for his career, barring a few really high-end seasons. It's also not like he was doing this against some chums in the group stage too. He bagged 2 goals and 2 assists against the Lyon team that would go on to make the semi-finals the next season, 2 goals against United, and 2 goals against champions Liverpool. Yes, he didn't reach the heady heights of 2014 or 2016 Ronaldo, but this was still a pretty special Champions League campaign, even if it did end in the worst possible fashion. Kinda reminds me how people were complaining about the end of Game of Thrones. It left a bitter taste in their mouths immediately after, but in the years since, it seems the series as a whole has begun to be more appreciated. Despite being shifted back out to the right wing, we still see him dropping into the middle of the park, and the reduction in midfield technical quality meant he had to drop deeper more often to facilitate ball progression. Fortunately, he's able to use his marauding dribbling style so effectively to pierce defenses and put them under strain. However, he was also able to strike that balance between dropping deep and providing the technical quality and staying forward to have a presence in the box. This was the problem that late career Messi faced. He was almost always the best ball progressor on his team, but he was also an elite attacker and goal scorer, and I felt he had the most optimal balance between the two this season. When it came to all three phases of attacking play, moving the ball forward, setting up teammates, and putting the ball in the back of the net, Messi was world class. While this wasn't one of his very best playmaking seasons according to his assist numbers, this was one of the best according to the eye test. And by eye test, I mean eye test, as in I was testing his ability and I believe it's one of his best. You see that when you dig a bit deeper into the numbers and consider the portion of his teammates' goals that are assisted by him, especially against tougher competition. He was especially deadly from the edge of the box, finding teammates with little dinks and silky through balls. He's always had the vision, but by now his execution had been elevated to a level where he was able to make these passes with surgeon level precision and CEO level decision making ability. He wasn't going to be breaking any records with his raw goal contributions, but they were still very good. A significant uptick from the majority of the seasons between this season and the last one we looked at. The bulk of these contributions came from his goal scoring, and this was his last truly special goal scoring season. In fact, on a purely rate basis, this was one of his best goal scoring seasons outside of the two outrageous seasons in 2012 and as is evident by this Derrick Henry-esque stiff arm of Fabinho, who looks about twice his size. In exchange for this solidity and sturdiness, it seems he lost quite a bit of his pace and burst though, and he simply wasn't the same athlete he was at the beginning of his career. Also, a big reason for his mediocre raw goal production, despite his elite rate numbers, was his game time. He only completed around 30 90s, which was very low for his usual standards. Perhaps the biggest concern from this season was the overall Barca attack when he was on the pitch though. Yes, the talent level had dropped, but these were some of the worst attacking teams he's played on. It's undeniable that Messi had a more significant influence on this team's attack, but he wasn't able to lift it to a mediocre level offensively relative to the rest of his career. Yes, the team was successful, but that's not because of their fluent attacking ability. Rather, it was through a relatively solid defense and timely Messi goals. Some will argue that this should only boost the case for this season. Instead, I argue that his production in other seasons led to far better outcomes more often than this season. This season gets the James Harden on the Houston Rockets award. The best versions of the Houston Rockets of James Harden were borderline unwatchable at times. Absolutely everything ran through Harden. He had the ball in his hands on every possession, and almost all of them ended with a Harden shot or a shot from a teammate that was assisted by Harden. He was the team. Daryl Morey, the Rockets GM, specifically put players around Harden to complement him. Yes, he didn't build a team that complemented each other, he built a team that complemented Harden. As a result, Harden put out some of the most ridiculous statistical seasons since Wilt Chamberlain. Just like Messi in 2019 though, Harden failed to deliver a championship. Or at least the one Barcelona fans really wanted.